What do you do when it's your job to be a weapon, but you just want to watch your stories? Patreon commissioned review, the first installment in the Murderbot Diaries, All Systems Red. I didn't really know a lot about this series. I know it's been adapted to Apple TV. I believe it's getting a second season. Haven't seen any of those. Don't currently have access to Apple TV at the present. But I have now read the first book. It's really good. It's funny kind of having this chase, the last book that I read being Kitty Cat Kills Sat, which, like, they feel like odd complements to each other. Because Kitty Cat Kills Sat had, it was narrated by a cat basically manning a doomsday satellite, whereas here we have the narration coming from a partially mechanical, partly organic security being, a sec unit, I think that is what they shorthand it, security unit, who thinks of himself or itself, themself. I can't remember if it gets identified with masculine pronouns. Doesn't have any primary sex characteristics as far as the downstairs area. It's basically literally blank. But I'm gonna go with he, if for no other reason than I know they cast Alexander Skarsgård for the show, so I'm gonna roll with that. Hopefully that's okay with people. We'll see if I get dragged in the comments. But he thinks of himself as Murderbot, and we hear his thought process as he goes through the routine of, trying to protect and be the security force for this surveying team on this hazardous planet. And he didn't care. He doesn't care about his job. Why would he? He'd much rather work his way through the hundreds of hours of serialized entertainment that he has downloaded for himself. Now, he's not supposed to have done that. He has overridden what's called his governor unit, which is supposed to really severely restrict what he can and can't do. But that's not working right now. And he's taking advantage of the fact and just spending as much time doing something that actually brings him happiness as he possibly can. That's not to say he doesn't do the job. He'll do the job. He'll even do it to the best of his ability. But also, as he himself is quick to point out in narration, he doesn't actually care. Like, he'll get a mission briefing download and barely skim it because all that really matters is, okay, what's the objective? What are the hazards? I don't care about the rest of this. You'll find out later as it goes on, he doesn't even really know who the people are he's protecting. Not because he wasn't told. He was. He didn't listen. Or he didn't read that part of his briefing because the governing unit wasn't there to force him to have done so. And so we have this whole story from the perspective of this somewhat disengaged but very affable, very relatable security unit. And the way that we get bits of world building about how this greater universe is constructed, how it operates, how the company that he works for operates, because he doesn't belong to the surveying team. These kinds of teams have to be insured, bonded, and as part of that, they have to take company security units with them, which is why he's there. So there's lots of little moments that show more thought into it than just going with the templates, because you're like, oh, the company is dangerous and has its own agenda, but it gets reiterated repeatedly. No, the company is just there to minimize liability while maximizing profits. They will be as cheap as they can get away with, but also will avoid situations that will cost them massive liability and or clients. It's treated like an actual corporation as opposed to, something like Weyland Yutani, which, the basis by which something like Weyland Yutani in the Alien films works is because the idea that it is so massive that it doesn't have to even worry about losing clients anymore. But if we're not going to go that far, my lava lamp turned off. Why did that happen? Okay, that burned out. We'll have to fix that later. But if you're not going to take it that far with the idea that the corporations are basically completely above any reciprocity. Like, there's no real indication that there are definitely going to be governing bodies who will hold them to account. But, like, if they screw up, there are other corporate entities that they will owe money to, and they will lose their clients. So I like that a lot of the complications aren't because somebody's secretly evil, but because people are just acting in self-interest, or corporations are acting in self-interest the way that they currently do. They're not immoral, but they are amoral, which is a way more interesting thing for me, especially at this point, because while I don't disagree with evil mega corporations, and certainly plenty has happened to validate that to continue to be a thing that shows up in our media. At the same time, it's gotten a little cliche, and it's nice to see more thought put into it than just going with that template. The characters all feel very well established. It helps that, like, everybody clearly has an existing dynamic with each other. You know, all these people that the Murderbot is assigned to protect and be security for, they have established routines, dynamics, relationships, and they're a pretty functional unit. It's just they don't know what to make of Murderbot when they have to start thinking of him like a person and less like a piece of equipment. Now, they don't have to, but circumstances make it so it's more difficult for them to think of him as a piece of equipment. And Murderbot doesn't want them to think of him as more than a piece of equipment. That's one of the things I really like about it. There's this heavy emphasis, because normally he has a helmet that with a very opaque sort of shield, face shield on it, which means they can't see his face, which means they can think of him as a robot, and he'd rather that they did, because if they think of him like a person, they might try and talk to him. They might try and interact with him. And he does not want to interact with these people. Murderbot he's pretty neurodivergent coded. If you either are neurodivergent, or if you have neurodivergent people who mean a lot to you, you are probably familiar with how difficult it can be to meet somebody's eyes, to look them in the face, and hold a conversation like that. It can be really uncomfortable. And you get that very strongly from Murderbot. He does not want them to look at him. He does not want them seeing his face. He doesn't want to be perceived. He doesn't. And there's even a point later on where, he kind of gets asked, because it is like a neurodivergent in a room full of neurotypicals. They're kind of like, well, why are you afraid we're going to see your face? And he kind of snaps at them like, I'm not a pleasure bot. You don't need to see my face. In his mind, the idea that they would see his face at all should only happen if he's there to fulfill a function where that is a requirement. And as far as he's concerned, it's not. Please don't look at me. And there's just a lot of sort of welled up feelings about the situation he's in, situations he has been in. It's really well done. And the pacing on this is phenomenal. This is, I think, technically a novella, and I have actually been commissioned to do both this and the immediate follow-up. So I don't know when I'll get to that, but that is the next book I'm going to do before I move on to other stuff that is on the commission docket for books. But I really admire the pacing on this. A novella is the perfect length for this. And I also understand why that was appealing, or probably was part of the reason why it was appealing to something like Apple TV. Because this, as an audiobook, about 3 hours and a bit, this could definitely be a full season of television. It would not be that hard, especially if, you linger on some shots. I do, again, I haven't seen the show. I do wonder if they actually have, narration of Murderbot's thought process. And the reason I wonder that is his narration, his narrative voice is a big part of what makes this work. And it's not that you can't have narration in television or film. You can, but it usually just tends to come across as clunky. It is something that does not lean into the strengths of the medium, at all, and can very frequently come across as just kind of awkward. But I don't know how they made it. Somebody who saw the show, tell me if they did that or not. But the narrative voice is real great. But again, the pacing, the steadiness with which, things are moving forward. Nothing feels like filler. Everything's moving at a steady pace without also feeling rushed. This is one of those stories that feels like it is exactly as long as it needed to be to tell the story that it was telling, and not a second longer. And that doesn't mean that it is rushed through. It just means it is incredibly tight and not padded. Now, that's not necessarily a knock. Padding doesn't have to be a bad thing. Downtime, quieter moments, moments to sort of break up the main narrative by giving us some side stuff away, that can all be really valuable if you know how to balance it, which not all writers do. So I don't want to give you the idea that quote unquote padding or anything that isn't core to the essential narrative should be discarded, but there is a real elegance to a story in which there is not an ounce of fat on it, and yet it does not feel rushed through. And I really think that this pulls that off incredibly well. I really enjoy this, and I am excited to look into the follow-up book, which I cannot remember the title to now. But this one was All Systems Red. If you like sci-fi, and if you like personal sort of stories, and if you like to hear the thought process of something that doesn't have the same kind of thought process you're used to seeing done in narration, which was, again, one of the things I really liked about Kitty Cat Kill Sat. If you like that, if you like hearing a different thought process than normally gets highlighted in works like this, I definitely recommend this quite a bit. Yeah, All Systems Red. Have you read it? Have you seen the show? What are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. Those all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Subin Lutfulla, Andikate 808, Mara G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, The Baba Duchess, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Barabajago, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. I also want to give my thanks to all the supporters who didn't get named, because you are all indeed very nifty people. You could be a nifty person too if you go support me on Patreon, and there's the clause. Ugh.